AITA for not tipping after overhearing what my waitress said about me. Last night was supposed to be one of those milestone moments, my mom finally meeting my boyfriend's mom. The whole evening had been meticulously planned. I'd chosen a beautiful restaurant, made reservations well in advance, and we both made sure to arrive a little early. My mom and I are always punctual people, it's just in our nature. So, we walked into the restaurant about 30 minutes before our scheduled reservation, figuring that if anything, we'd get some extra time to chat and ease into the evening. To our surprise, the hostess at the entrance didn't seem to mind us being early, and she showed us to a cozy table by the window right away. It was pretty empty, which seemed odd for such a nice place, but we didn't think much of it. My mom and I sat down, admiring the ambience, the soft lighting, and the beautifully set tables. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. We sat there, waiting, and at first, it wasn't a big deal. My mom and I were just chatting, going over the menu, trying to decide what looked good. The place was quiet, so for what I'd heard was a popular restaurant. I scanned the room, and there were only a few scattered tables with diners, a couple here, another table with a small group near the back, and a few people seated at the bar. Nothing that would explain why we'd been sitting there, without so much as a hello, for what was edging close to 15 minutes. At around the 10-minute mark, I started to get that prickling sense of discomfort, the kind that starts at the base of your neck and creeps its way up. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe our server was busy in the kitchen or handling some unseen task, but after a while, I couldn't ignore it. I mean, there was hardly anyone else there. I kept glancing around, watching as other servers moved back and forth, wondering why ours seemed to be nowhere in sight. I could feel my mom starting to get antsy beside me too, glancing at her watch, then at the bar, her lips pressed together in that way she does when she's trying to keep her patience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, our waitress appeared. She didn't smile or offer a friendly good evening. She didn't even ask how we were doing. Instead, she just stood there with her order pad tucked under her arm, looking at us like we were wasting her time. "What do you want to drink?" she asked, her voice as flat as day-old soda. Her tone took me off guard. I've been to plenty of restaurants, and even on their worst days, servers usually at least try to feign some semblance of hospitality. But this felt like she was doing us a favor just by showing up. I glanced at my mom, who raised her eyebrows slightly, clearly feeling the tension too. Trying to keep things light, we both gave her our drink orders, just a ginger ale for me and a vodka soda for my mom. Nothing complicated, nothing that would take more than a few seconds to note down. But instead of taking out her order pad or even nodding in acknowledgement, the waitress just stood there, staring blankly, as if she had better things to do than memorize our trivial requests. I remember thinking maybe she was just having an off night, but there was something else, a strange kind of detachment, that was hard to ignore. After she left, my mom leaned over and whispered, she didn't even write it down. We both shared a look that was equal parts disbelief and exasperation, but we tried to laugh it off, brushing it aside. Maybe she's got a good memory, I joked, trying to keep the mood light. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I had this gnawing feeling that it wasn't about memory. She just didn't care enough to get it right. And, of course, I was right. It took her another 15 minutes to bring the drinks over. At that point, I was just hoping they'd be correct, but when she finally placed them in front of us, it was like she'd made a deliberate effort to mess them up. I looked down at my drink, and instead of ginger ale, there was a Pepsi sitting in front of me. My mom had something that looked like a vodka soda but definitely didn't smell like one. I felt my mom tense up beside me, a slight tightening of her jaw, but when she spoke, she kept her voice as polite as ever. "Oh, excuse me," she said, in that calm, gracious way of hers. "I didn't order this." The waitress didn't say a word. She didn't even nod to acknowledge the mistake. Instead, she let out this long, exaggerated sigh, like we'd just asked her to remake the entire meal from scratch, rolled her eyes, and snatched my mom's glass off the table with a roughness that made my stomach clench. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared. I shifted in my seat, feeling a mixture of frustration and discomfort settle over me, but I didn't want to let it ruin the night. My mom and I exchanged a quick look, silently agreeing to just ride it out and hope things got better. I'm just going to pop to the bathroom, I said, needing a moment to clear my head. I excused myself, making my way back toward the entrance. Since it was my first time there, I had no idea where the bathroom was, so I figured I'd ask one of the hostesses up front. But as I approached, I noticed our waitress standing with a couple of other staff members, chatting casually, laughing as though she didn't have a care in the world. I wasn't trying to listen in, I just happened to hear her voice as I got closer. And then, suddenly, her words registered, and I stopped in my tracks. "Oh, I got stuck with a black table. They never tip well," she said, loud enough that anyone passing by could hear. My heart sank. My mom and I were the only black people in the restaurant, so there was no doubt she was talking about us. She hadn't even tried to keep her voice down. It was casual, almost like this was a normal thing for her to say. I was stunned, but also, sadly, not entirely surprised. I felt a surge of anger, but I didn't want to confront her right there, so I walked up and asked one of the hostesses, in the calmest voice I could muster, where the bathroom was. The hostess pointed me in the right direction, and I went to compose myself. When I came back to the table, my boyfriend and his mom had already arrived. My boyfriend's mom looked thrilled, beaming with excitement, as she hugged me and my mom, talking about how happy she was to finally meet us. My boyfriend gave me a warm smile, and I felt myself start to relax again. The waitress came back to our table, and it was like someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly, she was all smiles, joking with us, taking notes, filling our water glasses constantly. She even complimented my mom on her earrings, something I couldn't imagine her doing just 20 minutes ago. The change was so obvious that I could feel my mom's discomfort too. She knew something was off, but neither of us wanted to sour the night by mentioning it. The evening went beautifully after that. Conversation flowed, laughs were shared, and by the end of dinner, my boyfriend's mom was already talking about future plans, hinting at family gatherings and holidays. I felt a pang of happiness and gratitude, grateful that everything had turned out so well despite the rough start. So, when the bill came, I decided I'd treat everyone as a gesture of thanks. The waitress brought over the check and handed me the machine to enter the tip amount. I looked up at her and smiled as I keyed in 0%. She didn't notice right away, but I could see the moment she did, as her face fell slightly. We'd already started to get up to leave, and she reached out, tapping me on the shoulder. "Excuse me, ma'am, I just wanted to check, did you make a mistake with the tip amount?" she asked, forcing a smile. I took a quick look at the receipt and then looked back at her. "I don't think so," I replied calmly, watching her expression shift. She pressed on, asking if there was any issue with her service. I smiled, the kind that's all teeth and no warmth, and replied, "Oh, your service was fantastic tonight. But as a black woman, I just don't tip well." Her face went white. She let out a nervous laugh, and I gave a light chuckle in response before I turned and walked out. As we were walking to the car, my boyfriend's mom was quiet. She eventually turned to me and asked what had happened. I explained, keeping my voice steady, about what I had overheard. I expected her to be sympathetic, maybe even outraged on my behalf, but instead, she seemed upset at me. She told me that even if the waitress was rude, it would have shown character to leave a tip anyway. She went on to say that leaving a tip, even a small one, would have been the right thing to do. My boyfriend, who had been listening quietly, jumped in to defend me, pointing out that the waitress had been overtly rude and unprofessional. My mom nodded in agreement, saying she was proud of me for standing up for myself in a dignified way. But my boyfriend's mom stayed firm in her belief that I'd handled it wrong. She didn't say much more after that, but I could tell she was disappointed. Now I'm left wondering if maybe I should have left a small tip just to keep the peace, to avoid any hard feelings with my boyfriend's mom. But another part of me feels like I did the right thing. Why should I reward someone for treating us poorly just because they think we don't tip? Update 1. A week after that uncomfortable night, I thought the situation was behind us, a one-off experience I'd rather not repeat. So, when my boyfriend's mom suggested we meet again at the very same restaurant, I felt a pit forming in my stomach. She'd called my boyfriend and asked if we could all get together for another meal, saying she wanted to see us more often and felt that another outing would be a good way to bond further. While I loved the idea of us getting closer, I couldn't shake the memory of that waitress and her attitude. But I kept my reservations to myself. I didn't want to seem difficult or create tension between my boyfriend's mom and me. When we all agreed on the time, I did my best to focus on the positives. I thought, maybe this time would be different, and maybe I could just enjoy the evening and move past what had happened last time. The restaurant seemed as good a place as any to keep things comfortable and familiar, and the location was ideal for everyone. My boyfriend's mom sounded genuinely excited, and I could tell she was putting in an effort to get closer to me, which I appreciated. She'd even called ahead and arranged for the same table by the window. I tried to convince myself that it would all be fine. We arrived separately but around the same time, each of us greeting the others warmly as we settled into our seats, commenting on the cozy ambience of the place as if we hadn't all just been here days earlier. I felt a bit of relief as I looked around and saw the restaurant was busier than it had been before. I thought maybe a bustling dining room would keep everything more focused on the food and conversation, leaving less room for the uncomfortable atmosphere that had settled over our last visit. But as soon as I looked up, my relief faded. There she was, the same waitress from last time. She spotted us, and I could see her recognition flash across her face, followed by a quick shift in her expression. This time, however, there was no hostility, no rolled eyes, no dismissive posture. In fact, she approached our table with a warm smile, one that almost looked genuine. Her greeting was polite and upbeat as she asked if we were ready to order drinks. My mom and boyfriend's mom exchanged a look, as if pleasantly surprised, and I could tell they were both pleased that the evening seemed to be getting off to a much better start. Throughout the meal, the waitress was attentive. She filled our water glasses without us asking, checked in on our table regularly, and even offered thoughtful recommendations from the menu. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax, thinking maybe my words had had an impact on her. Maybe my call out the last time had given her a moment to reflect, to adjust her attitude and recognize the importance of treating all patrons with respect. I started to feel more at ease, laughing with everyone, genuinely enjoying the company and the atmosphere. The food arrived promptly, and we settled into an easy rhythm of conversation, passing plates, and sharing bites. I watched the waitress move between tables, and every time she came to ours, she seemed genuinely focused on making sure we were well taken care of. By the time we'd finished our meals, I'd nearly forgotten the discomfort from our previous experience. She'd been polite, professional, and attentive, and I was starting to feel like maybe she'd truly changed her approach. When the waitress brought over the check, she looked straight at me with a smile that seemed carefully crafted, polite but with an edge that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Her tone was overly sweet, just the right shade of pointed, as she said, "I hope you're okay with the service this time, and I'm hoping the tip reflects it." The words landed like a slap. For a moment, I just blinked, trying to process the layers of her remark. I could feel my face flushing with embarrassment and irritation as her comments settled in. After everything, after making an effort to give her another chance and pushing myself to look past our previous experience, she'd thrown in that jab, a pointed reminder that she felt entitled to a reward. It was like she hadn't let go of that last interaction, as if the absence of a tip had stuck with her in a way that the rest of the evening, her initial attitude, the rolled eyes, her dismissive tone hadn't with me. All of my initial goodwill, the sense of relief I'd felt from her improved behavior throughout the night, dissolved in an instant. Here I was, actually ready to tip her for her good service, ready to let go of the sour start we'd had, but she tossed that right back in my face with a passive-aggressive remark. The smooth evening soured. I could feel my boyfriend and our moms watching, sensing the shift, but I didn't want to let her comment go without a response. I picked up the card reader and punched in 0%. I did it without hesitation, feeling the heat of both irritation and embarrassment rushing through me as I keyed in the number. As I finished and handed back the machine, I could see the shock register on her face. Her eyes widened as she glanced at the receipt, taking in the tip amount, her expression shifting from surprise to something almost accusatory. It was like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing, couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that her remark had backfired. She lingered there, staring down at me with a mixture of frustration and confusion, like I'd somehow personally wronged her. She finally broke the silence, saying, in an incredulous tone, that she couldn't understand what had gone wrong, that she'd done everything right this time. Her response only fueled my irritation. I'd given her every chance, sat through the evening with an open mind, tried to be fair about her improved service. But her words brought me back to our last encounter, to the clear bias she'd shown then. She couldn't even see how out of line her comment was, how it felt like a dig at my character, as though I were some problem customer she needed to deal with rather than a person she was serving. Before I could respond, my boyfriend's mom stepped in. She'd been watching, silent but observant, and I could feel her growing tension as she caught on to what was unfolding. I could tell by the way she looked at me, a mixture of disappointment and, maybe, frustration. Without a word, she reached into her bag, and I watched, feeling a strange twist in my chest as she pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She handed it to the waitress with a small, apologetic smile, as if smoothing over my supposed transgression. The waitress's face transformed, shock melting into smug satisfaction as she accepted the bill, her earlier shock replaced with a triumphant look that stung. She pocketed the money quickly, glancing back at me with an expression that felt almost like a victory, a parting shot that said, "I won." We gathered our things and made our way to the door, but I couldn't shake the resentment building inside me. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. The waitress's comment had been a thinly veiled jab, a way of reminding me that she felt entitled to my tip regardless of her previous treatment, and now my boyfriend's mom had reinforced that entitlement by apologizing on my behalf and paying her generously. As we left the restaurant, I could feel the tension in the air, and while my boyfriend gave me a sympathetic look, I knew he felt stuck in the middle. Update 2. A few days after that tense dinner, I was still wrestling with a mix of emotions, frustration, disappointment, and, if I was honest with myself, a lingering sting of embarrassment. My boyfriend's mom had made her point in the restaurant with that $100 tip, and while it had felt like a blow, I'd assumed it was the end of it. I figured she'd either forget about the incident or chalk it up to a difference in perspective. But one evening, while I was winding down after a long day, my phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see her name on the screen. I wasn't expecting to hear from her so soon, and a small part of me hoped she was calling to smooth things over, maybe even to acknowledge the uncomfortable tension that had settled over that night. Instead, as I answered, it quickly became clear that her tone was anything but conciliatory. From the outset, she told me that she wanted to have a heart-to-heart about what had happened at the restaurant. She jumped right into it, saying she felt compelled to call because she believed I'd made a big mistake by not leaving a tip for the waitress. She started listing her reasons, saying it wasn't just about the money but about the impression it left. In her words, I'd shown poor character by failing to acknowledge the waitress's effort, and by doing so, I'd embarrassed her, my boyfriend, and ultimately, myself. Her words cut deeply, each one piling onto the uncomfortable feeling I'd been trying to shake since that night. As she continued, I could feel my frustration bubbling beneath the surface. I explained everything: how the waitress had behaved on our first visit, the way she'd practically ignored us until my boyfriend and his mom had arrived, the rude remark she'd made about a black table, and how all of that had made her comment about the tip that night sting even more. I laid out my side, hoping she'd understand that it wasn't just a snap decision. It was a choice grounded in the way I'd been treated. I tried to paint the full picture, wanting her to see that it wasn't about being petty or cheap, but about the principle, about not rewarding someone for showing me open disrespect, regardless of how she behaved once the rest of the family arrived. But as I spoke, I could sense her impatience growing. She listened, but only in a way that felt surface level, as if she'd already decided how she felt and was just waiting for me to finish. When I was done, she sighed, and her tone was calm, but it felt dismissive, almost patronizing. She brushed off everything I'd said about the waitress's earlier behavior, insisting that what mattered was that the waitress had tried to do her job well that night. In her mind, any past issues were irrelevant because, by the time we'd all sat down, the waitress was being perfectly polite. I had to reward that effort, she said, because failing to do so was like refusing to meet people halfway. To her, a tip wasn't conditional on the whole experience, just the effort put forth, and in her eyes, I should have been gracious enough to look past anything that had happened before. Then, just as I thought she'd reached her point, she took it a step further. She said that since I was dating her son, she expected me to be mindful of how my actions reflected on him. According to her, my decision not to tip wasn't just about me. It was a reflection of my boyfriend and, by extension, his family. She told me, in no uncertain terms, that she didn't want her son to be embarrassed or associated with behavior that she deemed petty. She stressed that as his girlfriend, my actions in public settings mattered, and that if we were going to be a part of her family, she needed to be able to trust that I wouldn't embarrass him in the future. Her words left me stunned, sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling a rush of disbelief and anger. It felt like she wasn't just criticizing my actions but questioning my character, and, in a way, making it clear that my standing with her family was contingent on my compliance with her standards. Her focus on appearances, on what she deemed proper, seemed to overshadow any understanding of the values I was standing by. The idea that my decision was somehow a reflection on my boyfriend, or that I was embarrassing him by standing up for myself, left me feeling not only dismissed but misunderstood. It was as if she was telling me that my values didn't matter, that the only thing that counted was maintaining a polished image, even if it meant swallowing disrespect. I felt a wave of frustration, a knot forming in my stomach as I realized how little room there was for me to be myself in her worldview. Her stance left no space for personal integrity or the right to stand up for oneself. It was all about projecting an image she felt was suitable. I could barely respond. I could only murmur a quick acknowledgement, saying I understood, but the words felt hollow, like a forced acceptance of something I couldn't actually agree with. I didn't want to argue further. I wanted to get off the phone, to end the conversation before I said something that would make things worse. So I kept my voice steady, thanked her for her perspective, and, after a few quick pleasantries, hung up. When the call ended, I sat there, feeling a mix of emotions that I could hardly sort through. I was angry, hurt, and a little disillusioned. In her eyes, my worth was tied to how well I could conform, to how neatly I could fit into her standards of polite society. My decision, one that I'd made thoughtfully and that was rooted in my own experience and values, was, in her view, nothing more than an inconvenience, an embarrassment that she felt needed correction. Am I really wrong?